Sophie and the Magic Mirror. Sophie was a quiet and shy young 9-year-old girl who lived with her parents in a small village called Bodale. It was a small village, and there wasn't many other children, so Sophie didn't have many friends. Sophie's mom, Emma, looked after Sophie and the house while her dad went to work. Her dad, Terence, was a scrap merchant who collected old junk for a living. He collected anything and everything, from bicycles, washing machines, cookers, and even rare, valuable antique furniture. And that's where this story begins. One day, while Terence was on his rounds, he visited Mr. and Mrs. Davison's house at Bowdale Farm. The Davisons lived on the farm he had inherited from his late grandfather Peter. He wanted to clear out some rubbish out of an old derelict barn at the back so he could make room for his new tractor that he had brought and wanted shelter so it wouldn't rust when it rained. The Davisons asked Terence if he would be able to come and move some of the scrap they had in the garage. So Terence got in his truck and on his way to the farm he drove. The old barn had not been used since Mr. Davison's father Peter had sadly passed away some 20 years ago. In the barn was an old tractor engine, an old shovel and spade, a pitchfork, and in the corner, under a pile of old sheets, was an old chest of drawers. Upon the drawers was a mirror that swiveled back and forth but had a catch to stop it swiveling more than a few inches. On top of the chest of drawers lay an old rusty bucket with paint brushes in them and a half empty wood varnish tin. Terence instantly could see that the chest of drawers with the swivel mirror was a rare antique and felt sorry for the state it lay, as it had once obviously been a cherished piece of furniture. Beauty in design. Terence loaded up his truck. "Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Davison," he said as he drove away. Now, Sophie's parents weren't rich, but she always looked forward to her dad coming back from work as she couldn't wait to see what useful scrap he had. Most of Sophie's toys had come from Dad's scrap ran from what other people had thrown away. Old dolls, push bikes, skipping ropes, and whatever else. Sophie even made use of an old wardrobe, which her dad had made into a pirate ship with a pole and an old sheet as sails. But whatever she had, she respected it and didn't want for more. When Terence returned, Sophie watched as Dad unloaded the van. She stood and stared to see what he had brought home today. She saw him unload the pitchfork, then the shovel and spade, followed by the rusty bucket with paintbrushes and a varnish tin. Jake, Sophie's neighbor, came round and helped Terence unload the tractor engine and the antique chest of drawers. Jake liked to play around with motors and often brought scrap parts from Sophie's dad, Terence. The pitchfork, spade, and shovel were also put to use as Mr. Green, who owned the village grocery, needed some for his allotment. As for the rusty old bucket, it so turned out there was a leak down the cellar, and the bucket would come in handy while Terence got round to repairing it. But Sophie's dad never got round to repairing anything round the house. He was always too busy collecting scrap. And as for the old antique chest of drawers, Jake helped Terence carry it downstairs into the cellar. "I'll have a go at restoring this sometime," said Terence, and thanked Jake for his help. "Hmm," said Sophie's dad. "That just leaves the paintbrush and half empty wood varnish tin." "Why don't I have it?" said Sophie. I could varnish the old antique chest of drawers with a mirror. Hmm, hmm, said Dad. Yes, okay. And if you do a really good job, I'll buy you a new bicycle. Sophie was excited. She had never helped her dad restore an old antique furniture before. Sophie couldn't wait to get started varnishing the chest of drawers, that she rushed down steps of the cellar with her half-empty tin of varnish and paint brushes. She first rinsed her brushes out with cold water, then dried them with an old tea cloth. She then dipped her brush into the varnish tin and began to spread the varnish evenly all over the antique chest of drawers until it looked spanking new again. She stood back and took a good look at how well she had done. While doing so, she noticed the glass on the mirror wasn't clean. It had dusty cobwebs all over it, and she couldn't see her own reflection as it was that dirty. Sophie went upstairs and asked Mom, "Can I borrow some polish and a kitchen cloth to clean the antique chest of drawers mirror Dad brought home today?" "Of course you can," replied Mom. "Why not take a duster down also and do a really good job?" "Thank you," replied Sophie, and off she went back down to the cellar. Sophie had spent hours dusting, polishing, and varnishing the chest of drawers that her eyes began to droop and she began to yawn. But before her eyes closed completely, she turned on the light as it was getting dark and glared into the once non-reflective mirror to see how sparkly it had now become. It was now really clear, and she could see clearly her long blonde hair, blue eyes, and her rosy cheeks as she smiled with admiration. She was extremely proud of the hard work she had done on the old chest of drawers. Sophie tapped on the top drawer and said, "I hope you're a proud chest of drawers now. I've taken a long time to make you what you are." Then Sophie huffed as she had tired herself out after all the hard work she had done, and she began to nod off. But just as her eyes shut with tiredness, the chest of drawers with the mirror on top rattled. Sophie looked up, and the once clean and clear mirror had become like glass made of sparkling crystals. The whole room lit up with glittering twinkles reflecting from the mirror. Sophie rubbed her eyes again and again, but the glittering, sparkling mirror carried on reflecting its crystallized glare. And not only that, but the mirror reflection that Sophie had been dazzled by was smiling when Sophie was not. Sophie put her right hand to her lips to check that she wasn't smiling. But no, it was the mirror. It was like it had a mind of its own. "That can't be," said Sophie. "How can a mirror smile when I don't?" "Because I'm happy," replied the mirror. "Amazing! You talk too?" Sophie said with astonishment. "Of course I talk. Silly. Doesn't everyone talk?" "Yes, but you're a mirror. Mirrors don't talk." "Anyway," said the mirror girl, "are we going to argue all day about whether or not I can talk, or are we going to have some fun?" "What is your name, by the way?" Sophie asked. "Well, I don't really have a name. Why don't you think of a name for me, and I shall be named that?" "Yes, okay. What about Crystal, as you sparkle like one?" Sophie answered. "Crystal it is. But as you know my name, what is yours?" "My name's Sophie. But what fun could we have as you're trapped in a mirror? And I don't know any mirror games." Sophie and Crystal talked and talked. Then Sophie asked Crystal, "How long have you been in the mirror? And do you have any friends?" "Well, I've always been here, I think." "Friends? Well, you're the first person I've ever spoken to. So, I guess you're my only friend." Sophie began to feel sorry for Crystal. "I haven't got a lot of friends either," said Sophie. "I live in a small village, and I don't have any children to play with. All I've got is my toys that my dad collects on his scrap round. So you're like me then, Sophie. We're both lonely. Yes, I guess so, replied Sophie. I wish you weren't a mirror girl. Then we could play for real, said Sophie with a sad face. At that instant, the chest of Josh shook harder like a small earthquake had erupted, and the mirror began to sparkle so brightly that the room was alive with a disco of lights. Crystal then appeared from out of the mirror. It was amazing, and she was fully dressed in the same gown and looked exactly like Sophie. Even Sophie's own parents couldn't have told them apart. Wow, said Sophie. Crystal then hugged Sophie tightly. Thank you very much, she said. Sophie was still shocked. Crystal, the mirror girl, had come out the mirror and was hugging her. But she wasn't scared. They were perfect for each other, the best of friends could be. Now, you don't need to know mirror games. We can play your games, Sophie. Sophie was so happy. At last, she had a friend. And not only that, they was the same as each other. Not only did they look the same, but they thought the same too. Every game Sophie wanted to play, Crystal did also. It was the best match of friends ever. They played with dolls, spinning tops, dominoes, cards, any game that Sophie had, they played. But most of it all was each other that was the most exciting. Finally, Sophie's eyes couldn't keep awake no longer, and she said good night to Crystal, her new and bestest friend of all time. Crystal went back in her mirror as she was also very tired, and she said, good night, Sophie. We will see each other again soon. And when Sophie woke the next morning, she knew she would have a friend to play with and wouldn't be lonely ever again. Also, she was looking forward to getting her new bicycle her dad had promised for making the chest of drawers look clean again. Sophie and the Magic Mirror.